So thank you, Professor Lark, for taking the time here conducting an interview with us for the Libertarian Party in Germany. You gave a very interesting, fascinating talk on ideas, actually. It was how to promote libertarian ideas, if I'm not mistaken. The title was On the Numbers, right? One main issue you focused on was statistics. Why should statistics matter, and why should they matter to the liberty movement?
I think that people who wish to make the argument effectively for liberty need to understand the language of statistics, because in many cases public policy issues are discussed based upon one's interpretation of various statistics. So if you don't understand the basic concepts and the language of statistics, you may not be able to do as effective a job of presenting a libertarian view about the ideas involving government programs. You may not be able to understand what other people are talking about when they advocate for government programs or they advocate against government programs. So I think at least a basic knowledge of statistics is very helpful to, well, it's very helpful to anyone, but particularly those who wish to advocate effectively for liberty.
Okay, so we have some proponents, some advocates of libertarianism, of the liberty movement, that say we should focus more on rights, that liberty is a rights issue and not so much an issue of empiricism on statistics, facts, and so on. So what do you tell your critics, actually?
Well, I agree strongly with the idea that we should emphasize rights. I am a rights-based libertarian. I'm not a utilitarian, although I understand the utilitarian arguments for liberty. Ultimately, my argument for liberty is a rights-based argument. I think that human beings, by their very nature, have certain rights that must be respected. However, many people do not share my perspective about rights. In the case, many libertarians don't believe in rights at all. So I think that even if one believes that the best defense of individual liberty and responsibility is a rights-based argument, you still have to be able to argue on the basis of prudential concerns, because many of the people with whom we're going to deal, they will not share our rights-based arguments. So if we're capable of pointing out that you don't share my notion of human rights or individual rights, however, from your perspective, the programs that you advocate based on prudential concerns are not going to get you where you want to go, and that the libertarian perspective offers a much better way of getting us to where you say you want to go, I think our arguments become much more strong in terms of being able to convince people. So I think you have to be able to make arguments in both areas, even if you are strongly moved, as I am, to a rights-based preference. It's still very important to be able to argue the prudential value of liberty.
Given that libertarians don't always share the same views, don't have always the identical approach when it comes to promoting liberty, what can we do to be more successful, to be more effective in the end? Do we have to have a certain threshold we have to stick to? Is there something like, you know, some standards, some libertarian standards we really have to honor?
I don't know. I think that the most important thing to arguing in favor of a libertarian perspective is, as I suggested in my address today, first of all, we have to set the highest standards of intellectual integrity. We have to apply the same criticism to our own ideas that we apply to the ideas of others. We have to set that highest standard of integrity. Intellectual sloppiness is no more appealing when it comes from our friends than when it comes from the people whom we view as opponents. The second point is we treat people with courtesy and respect. We listen to their ideas. We try to understand why they might have concerns about how a libertarian society will operate. And people have reasonable concerns. How will a libertarian society operate? There are many questions we may not be able to answer fully for them. And so I think the best way to convince them that we are at least interested in the same good things that they're interested in is that we treat people the right way. We treat them with courtesy and respect. We listen to what they have to say, we listen to their questions, and if we can, we try to answer those questions honestly and fairly. And I think that that basic approach is ultimately what we need to do to get people to take us seriously, to listen to our ideas, and ultimately I think that they will embrace our ideas, because ultimately I think societies based on liberty coupled with personal responsibility are better societies. Better societies not only by our preference structure, but by the preferences that in some cases our opponents say that they believe in.
So you stated that politeness and good manners is essential to promote liberty effectively, and I think you're a great advocate in doing so. What are the names you would give, talking about libertarians, that do a bad job, and who are the good ones? Who would you present to the public who are not doing any harm but are actually promoting the libertarian movement most effectively?
I'm not sure that I want to name those whom I would consider to be perhaps less effective advocates for liberty, because it's, in fairness, in many cases, it's difficult to say this person is not an effective advocate for liberty all the way around. It's possible that people are actually very effective with respect to certain issues because perhaps of their competence, their understanding, but maybe they don't necessarily leave others with the best impression of libertarians. If you think you're so much smarter than the people to whom you're speaking, even when your ideas are right, it's not clear that people will necessarily treat them with the respect they deserve. So again, there are some people whom I might say, perhaps you could do things differently. I would avoid trying to criticize them by name. The people who I think are particularly effective advocates for liberty, of course, Dr. Tom Palmer, who will be here today. I think Dr. Palmer is one of the best advocates of liberty, both in the sense of understanding the ideas well and being able to convey those ideas. My colleague Sharon Harris, who was she was the president of the Advocates for Self-Government. She's now retired from that position, but Ms. Harris is a very effective advocate for liberty, and she, of course, is involved in instructing people on how to present the ideas of liberty. But there are many people who I think embrace this notion of, first of all, having the highest intellectual standards, but also respecting other people. And again, there are many people whom I can name, but Dr. Palmer and Ms. Harris are two who immediately come to mind.
How should libertarians handle controversial topics like global warming or also some conspiracy theories, for instance? What should be the libertarian approach, if we can say so?
Okay. Yes, I don't know that there is the libertarian approach. There's approaches that libertarians will take. You mentioned the issue of global warming, the idea that human activity may be contributing to a rise in temperatures that might have bad impact upon many people, perhaps other species. I think that what we have to do is recognize, first of all, this is a scientific question, and that while we may have particular moral values with respect to how we deal with the issue, ultimately the question is a scientific question, and we first have to get the science right. And we have to be willing to follow good science wherever the science goes. If science shows us, for example, that human activity, many cases activity-free and voluntary interaction of human beings, if it leads to problems for others, we have to take this seriously. We libertarians believe in property rights. We don't have the right to engage in actions that are going to cause harm to others. So if indeed the science shows us that there are going to be differential impacts that harm other people, then it very well may be that there needs to be some sort of mechanism to regulate that sort of activity. Now, it should be noted that many of those who believe that global warming is going to be a very bad problem, they advocate governmental measures that may not actually deal with the problem. So once we have identified what the true problem is, then how we react to that, we can bring to bear our libertarian perspective on that, and to say that if governments have any legitimacy, it is to protect rights. However, those governments must only act to protect rights. They're not there to engage in redistribution. They're not there to try to make life fair. They're there simply to protect rights. And so that means that the actions that governments might legitimately employ to protect those rights are likely to be very limited, and they need to be very transparent and very clear. And so I think that the libertarian perspective, once again, it informs our moral judgment, but we don't know right now what the science actually will tell us. Yes, I know many people say the science is settled. I'm not so sure the science is settled. With respect to other controversial issues, again, I think that we of libertarian disposition, we need to be scrupulously honest and fair. We need to look at the facts to the best we can ascertain them, and then we bring to bear our libertarian perspective. And it should be noted there are many times where reasonable people, people of goodwill, people who basically share our ideas, may come to different conclusions about what the proper outcome is. That's life.
Mm-hmm. Now, given that you gave the perspective that libertarians should listen to what the scientists say, it raises also the question of how independent and free science can be in a statist environment. There is government funding of scientific projects and so forth. So what shall a libertarian do when it comes to controversial topics like global warming? How much can we trust the science in a state-run economy and so forth?
The short answer is I don't know. I don't know that we really can have complete trust in people. In fact, I don't think we really should. There's an old expression in English which is supposedly from the Russian. It translates trust but verify. Always try to determine, are the facts as they're being presented, are they actually accurate? And even if the facts that are presented are accurate, are they being put in the proper context? We do the best we can. Unfortunately, very large government funding of science, it can drive science in a political direction. And I think that we of libertarian disposition can be very helpful to our fellow citizens by pointing out that yes, private actors may have very strong incentives to present evidence in a certain way. For example, firms that are involved in distribution, say, of oil or petroleum products, yes, they may have a particular bias or they have particular concerns, but then those who fund the science also may have ideological biases, they may have preferences, they may have financial interests that perhaps influence the direction of the science. So we must be aware of this. I think we cannot be complete skeptics and simply throw out anything that comes our way because, yes, government may have had a hand in funding it, but we do have to be careful, we do have to be wary. I guess this advice would apply to anybody. Whenever somebody comes forward offering evidence, offering data, offering information, we have to treat it with a certain degree of skepticism. And we have to be particularly careful to treat our friends with the same scrutiny that we would treat those with whom we think we disagree.
So, libertarians are not always very nice when it comes to promoting their message. What is your advice to people who are in the liberty movement? What can they do better? What can they improve? How can they become more effective proponents of liberty?
Well, again, each individual who is an advocate for liberty has to find the manner, the approach that works best for that person. And when I say being nice to people, I don't mean allowing people on the other side to behave badly, that simply we overlook it. However, I think that by setting a high standard with which we treat others, again, at least being willing to listen to what they say, at least being willing to engage their arguments, we are more likely to be able to keep the focus on what we wish to discuss. If we allow our behavior to serve as a distraction, where someone can say, well, you treated me badly or you didn't listen to my arguments, we're allowing others to change the agenda. We want to focus upon the ideas that we think are important. And if our behavior allows for other people to change the subject, we're not being as effective as possible. So I would argue that those of us who wish to be more effective, we all wish to be more effective advocates for liberty, we have to understand, first of all, what we're trying to accomplish. To whom are we really speaking? For example, if I'm having a discussion with you and there are many people standing around us, are you really the target of my discussion, or are the people who are listening to us. Perhaps you're someone that I think, frankly, for whatever reason, you're not likely to embrace the ideas I believe, but the people around you, maybe my discussion with them could be fruitful. You want to find out what really is your audience, what do you think you're going to be able to accomplish, and you need to be willing to practice. I think the phrase in auf Deutsch is Übung macht den Meister, practice makes the master. I think it's important for us, if we wish to be effective advocates for liberty, we have to be willing to invest the time and effort to develop the habits of effective advocates, which means you have to be willing to practice. You have to be willing to train, and to train well, because effective advocacy, regardless of what it is you're advocating, requires time, it requires effort, it requires hard work.
Okay, one last question, Professor Lark, and I can tell you straight out that the science here is not settled regarding the question how effective liberty or the message of liberty can be in a society where you already have libertarians, and on the other hand you have like statists, right? So this raised the question whether to be a libertarian is a matter of genetics rather than of reasoning and so forth. So might there be something like a libertarian gene, and if there was one, is there hope for the future of liberty?
Well, I don't know enough about the science of biology or genetics or the human organism to say whether or not there might be genes that predispose one toward liberty or against liberty. I think that clearly there are situations where perhaps people, by virtue of their experience, in their willingness to entertain risk, perhaps are more or less likely to be willing to tolerate risk. And by risk, in this case, I mean that in many cases when people are analyzing social institutions, particularly if they come out of a society where all they've ever known is government regulation, government institutions, it may be hard for them to conceive of how a truly market-oriented society would work. And we need, by the way, we need to understand that those who are coming from a base where they have no idea what a truly market liberal or libertarian society would look like, we need to understand that we are asking them to examine something where they have basically no frame of reference. So as we try to explain, we have to try to provide that frame of reference. Again, whether or not there is some sort of genetic predisposition toward being more friendly or less friendly to liberty, I don't know. I think that as we explain our ideas, we try to show, first of all, that our ideas have good, strong moral foundation, the idea of not initiating aggression against others, but also from a purely practical or prudential stand, I think our ideas are going to work at least as well as any conceivable alternative arrangement, and in many cases will work much, much better.
Professor Lark, one last question, really. Talking about the frame of reference, I know you're a beer expert, so you have a big unseen frame of reference when it comes to the taste of beer. It's not your first time in Prague, right?
It is my first time.
It's your first time, but what is the best beer you have tasted yet?
I'm actually, my favorite beers in the world are South German Hefeweizens, and so when they catch up to me for all my sins and crimes and I'm on death row, I'm waiting for my last meal, and it will be a big one. I'm going to wash it down with good South German Hefeweizens, Flanders red ale, sour ales, Flemish Witz. But there are some very good Czech beers here. Of course, the classic Pilsner Urquell is very, very nice. I hope to explore more Czech beers while I'm here. I haven't had the chance to do enough drinking yet, but I will be perfectly happy if the Czechs want to bring their beers forward for my evaluation. I'll be perfectly happy to try them.
James Lark III, here in Prague at the ESFL 2016 promoting German Hefeweizen. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.